The Greek Way to Civilization by Edith Hamilton. Chapter 1. East and West. 500 years before Christ, in a little town on the far western border of the settled and civilized world, a strange new power was at work. Something had awakened in the minds and spirits of the men, their which was so to influence the world that the slow passage of long time, of century upon century, and the shattering changes they brought would be powerless to wear away that deep impress. Well, the axial age had such impacts in multiple regions, but these developments were thousands or tens of thousands of years in the making. Or revivals, perhaps. Athens had entered upon her brief and magnificent flowering of genius, which so molded the world of mind and of spirit that our mind and spirit today are different. We think and feel differently because of what a little Greek town did during a century or two, 2,400 years ago. What was then produced of art and of thought has never been surpassed and very rarely equaled, as far as the secular world's concerned. And the stamp of it is upon all the art and all the thought of the Western world. Of course, these people weren't totally secular either. And yet, this full stature of greatness came to pass at a time when the mighty civilizations of the ancient world had perished, and the shadow of the effortless barbarism was dark upon the earth. In that black and fierce world, a little center of white-hot spiritual energy was at work. A new civilization had arisen in Athens. Unlike all that had gone before, what brought this new development to pass, how the Greeks were able to achieve all they did, has significance for us today. It is not merely that Greece has a claim upon our attention because we are, by our spiritual and mental inheritance, partly Greek, and cannot escape, if we would, that deep influence which worked with power through the centuries, touching with light of reason and grace of beauty. The wild northern savages, she has a direct contribution for us as well. The actual Greek remains are so few and so far away, so separated from us by space and a strange, difficult language, they are felt to be matters for the travelers and the scholars, and no more. But in truth, what the Greeks discovered, or rather, how they made their discoveries, and how they brought a new world to birth out of the dark confusions of an old world that had crumbled away, is full of meaning for us today, who have seen an old world swept away in the space of a decade or two. It is worth our while, in the confusions and bewilderments of the present, to consider the way by which the Greeks arrived at the clarity of their thought and the affirmation of their art. Very different conditions of life confronted them from those we face, but it is ever to be borne in mind that, though the outside of human life changes much, the inside changes little, and the lesson book we cannot graduate from is human experience. Great literature, past or present, is the expression of great knowledge of the human heart. Great art is the expression of a solution of the conflict between the demands of the world without and that within, and in the wisdom of either there would seem to be small progress. Of all that the Greeks did, only a very small part has come down to us, and we have no means of knowing if we have their best. it would be strange if we had. In the convulsions of that world of long ago, there was no law that guaranteed to art the survival of the fittest. But this little remnant, preserved by the haphazard of chance, shows the high water mark reached in every region of thought and beauty the Greeks entered. No sculpture compared to theirs, no buildings ever more beautiful, no writing superior, prose always late of development. They had time only to touch upon, but they left masterpieces. History has yet to find a greater exponent than Thucydides. Outside of the Bible, there is no poetical prose that can touch Plato. In poetry, they are all but supreme. No epic is to be mentioned with Homer, no odes to be set beside Pindar. Of the four masters of the tragic stage, 3 are Greek. Little is left of all this wealth of great art. The sculptures, defaced and broken into bits, have crumbled away. The buildings are fallen. The paintings have gone forever. Of the writings, all lost, but a very few. We have only the ruin of what was. The world has had no more than that for well on to 2,000 years, yet these few remains of the mighty structure have been a challenge and an incitement to men ever since, and they are among our possessions today, which we value as most precious. There is no danger now that the world will not give Greek genius full recognition. Greek achievement is a fact universally acknowledged. The causes responsible for this achievement, however, are not so generally understood. Rather, it is the fashion nowadays to speak of the Greek miracle, to consider the radiant bloom of Greek genius as having no root in any soil that we can give an account of. The anthropologists are busy indeed and ready to transport us back into the savage forest, where all human things, the Greek things too, had their beginnings. But the seed never explains the flower. Between those strange rites, they point us to through the dim vistas of far-away ages. In a Greek tragedy, there lies a gap they cannot help us over. The easy way out is to refuse to bridge it and dismiss the need to explain by calling the tragedy a miracle. But in truth, the way across is not impassable. Some reasons appear for the mental and spiritual activity which made those few years in Athens productive as no other age in history has been. By universal consent, the Greeks belong to the ancient world. Wherever the line is drawn by this or that historian between the old and the new, the Greeks' unquestioned position is in the old, but they are in it as a matter of centuries only. They have not the hallmarks that give title to a place there. The ancient world, insofar as we can reconstruct it, bears everywhere the same stamp. In Egypt, in Crete, in Mesopotamia, where we can read bits of the story, we find the same conditions. A despot enthroned, whose whims and passions are the determining factor in the state. We just have that translated in different terms, right? Because you always needed enough of a percentage of the population to pull that off. A wretched, subjugated populace, a great priestly organization to which is handed over the domain of the intellect. This is what we know as the Oriental state today. It has persisted down from the ancient world through thousands of years, never changing in any essential. Only in the last 100 years, less than that, it has shown a semblance of change, made a gesture of outward conformity with the demands of the modern world. But the spirit that informs it is the spirit of the East that never changes. It has remained the same through all the ages down from the antique world. Forever aloof from all that is modern, this state and this spirit were alien to the Greeks. None of the great civilizations that preceded them and surrounded them served them as model. With them, something completely new came into the world. They were the first Westerners, the spirit of the West. The modern spirit is a Greek discovery, and the place of the Greeks is in the modern world. The same cannot be said of Rome. Many things they're pointed back to the old world and away to the east, and with the emperors who were gods and fed a brutalized people full of horrors as their dearest form of amusement, the ancient and the oriental state had a true revival. Not that the spirit of Rome was of the eastern stamp. Common sense men of affairs were its product, to whom the cogitations of eastern sages ever seemed the idlest nonsense. "What is truth?" said Pilate scornfully. Well, in what people generally call Zoroastrianism, truth is more than just whether it's true or false. Truth is a lifestyle. It's an intention that is good and true. Good thoughts, good words, good deeds. But it was equally far removed from the Greek spirit. Greek thought, science, mathematics, philosophy, the eager investigation into the nature of the world and the ways of the world, which was the distinguishing mark of Greece, came to an end for many a century when the leadership passed from Greece to Rome. The classical world is a myth insofar as it is conceived of as marked by the same characteristics. Well, myths have meaning and purpose. Real myths. Athens and Rome had little in common. That which distinguishes the modern world from the ancient, and that which divides the West from the East, is the supremacy of mind in the affairs of men. And this came to birth in Greece, and lived in Greece alone of all the ancient world. The Greeks were the first intellectualists in a world where the irrational had played the chief role. They came forward as the protagonists of the mind. The novelty and the importance of this position are difficult for us to realize. The world we live in seems, to us, a reasonable and comprehensible place. It is a world of definite facts which we know a good deal about. We have found out a number of rules by which the dark and tremendous forces of nature can be made to move so as to further our own purposes, and our main effort is devoted to increasing our power over the outside material of the world. We do not dream of questioning the importance of what acts on the whole in ways we can explain and turn to our advantage. What brings about this attitude is the fact that, of all the powers we are endowed with, we are making use preemptively of the reason. We are not soaring above the world on the wings of the imagination or searching into the depths of the world within each one of us by the illumination of the Spirit. We are observing what goes on in the world around us, and we are reasoning upon our observations. Our chief and characteristic activity is that of the mind. The society we are born into is built upon the idea of the reasonable, and emotional experience and intuitive perception are accorded a place in it only if some rational account can be given of them. When you find that the Greeks too lived in a reasonable world as a result of using their reason upon it, we accept the achievement as the natural thing that needs no comment. But the truth is that even today our point of view obtains only within strict limits. It does not belong to the immense expanse and the multitudinous populations of the East. There, what goes on outside of a man is comparatively unimportant and completely undeserving of the attention of the truly wise. The observing reason which works on what we of the West call the facts of the real world is not esteemed in the East. This conception of human values has come down from antiquity. The world in which Greece came to life was one in which the reason had played the smallest role. All that was important in it belonged to the realm of the unseen, known only to the spirit. That is a realm in which, outside fact, everything that makes up this visible, sensible, audible world plays only an indirect part. I think that's kind of a wrong judgment about the ancients, is people fill in gaps much the same way now. Gaps in the understanding with guesses. The facts of the spirit are not seen or felt or heard. They are experienced. They are peculiarly a man's own, something that he can share with no one else. An artist can express them in some sort, partly at best. The saint and the hero, who are most at home in them, can put them into words or pictures or music, only if they are artists too. The greatest intellect cannot do that through the intellect, and yet every human being has a share in the experiences of the spirit. Mind and spirit together make up that which separates us from the rest of the animal world, that which enables a man to know the truth, and that which enables him to die for the truth. A hard and fast distinction between the two can hardly be made. Both belong to the part of us which, in Platonic phraseology, draws us up from that which is ever dragging us down, are, in the figure Plato is fondest of, that which gives form to the formless. But yet they are distinct. When St. Paul, in his great definition, says that the things that are seen are temporal, and the things that are not seen are eternal, he is defining the realm of the mind, the reason that works from the visible world, and the realm of the spirit that lives by the invisible. The ancient world before Greece, the things that are not seen, had become more and more the only things of great importance. The new power of mind that marked Greece arose in a world facing toward the way of the spirit. For a brief period in Greece, East and West met. The bias toward the rational that was to distinguish the West and the deep spiritual inheritance of the East were united. The full effect of this meeting, the immense stimulus to creative activity, given when clarity of mind was added to spiritual power, can be best realized by considering what had happened before Greece. What happens, that is, when there is great spiritual force, with the mind held in abeyance. This is to be seen most clearly in Egypt, where the records are the fullest, and far more is known than about any other nation of antiquity. It is materially to the point, therefore, to leave Greece for a moment and look at the country, which had the greatest civilization of all the ancient world. In Egypt, the center of interest was the dead, the ruling world power, a splendid empire, and death a foremost preoccupation. Countless numbers of human beings, for countless numbers of centuries, thought of death as that which was nearest and most familiar to them. It is an extraordinary circumstance which could be made credible by nothing less considerable than the immense mass of Egyptian art centered in the dead. To the Egyptian, the enduring world of reality was not the one he walked in along the paths of everyday life, but the one he should presently go to by the way of death. There were two causes working in Egypt to bring about this condition. The first was human misery. The state of the common man in the ancient world must have been wretched in the extreme. Those tremendous works that have survived through thousands of years were achieved at a cost in human suffering and death, which was never conceived of as a cost in anything of value. Nothing so cheap as human life in Egypt and in Nineveh, as nothing more cheap in India and China today. Even the well-to-do, the nobles, and the men of affairs lived with a very narrow margin of safety. An epitaph extant of a great Egyptian noble holds him up to admiration in that he was never beaten with whips before the magistrate. The lives and fortunes of all were completely dependent upon the whims of a monarch whose only law was his own wish. One has but to read the account of Tacitus gives of what happened under the irresponsible despotism of the early Roman emperors to realize that in the ancient world security must have been the rarest of goods. In such conditions, men, seeing little hope for happiness in this world, turned instinctively to find comfort in another. Only in the world of the dead could there be found security and peace and pleasure, which a man, by taking thought all his life for, might attain. No concern of earthly living could count to him in comparison, or be esteemed as real in comparison. Little profit for him there to use his mind, his reasoning powers. They could do nothing for him in the one matter of overwhelming importance, his status in the world to come. They could not give him hope when life was hopeless, or strength to endure the unendurable. People who are terrified and hard-pressed by misery do not turn to the mind for their help. This instinctive recoil from the world of outside fact was enormously reinforced by the other great influence at work upon the side of death and against the use of the mind, the Egyptian priesthood. Before Greece, the domain of the intellect belonged to the priests. They were the intellectual class of Egypt. Their power was tremendous. Kings were subject to it. Great men must have built up that mighty organization. Great minds, keen intellects. But what they learned of old truth and what they discovered of new truth was valued as it increased the prestige of the organization. And since truth is a jealous mistress and will reveal herself not a whit to any but a disinterested seeker, as the power of the priesthood grew, and any idea that tended to weaken it met with a cold reception, the priests must fairly soon have become sorry intellectualists, guardians only of what seekers of old had found, never using their own minds with freedom. Now, I find that with a lot of people that are very versed in conservative doctrine, is they can't even make conclusions with the material they have at hand or apply it to new situations. It's like what this scholar said and this scholar said, and not always. I'm just saying, it's something I've encountered. Probably why the Harvard, there's more reasons than that, right? I'm a small name. Not every person I'm trying to get interviews with or have discussions with is going to respond. But if I was going to their school, it would be easier. But there was another result, no less inevitable. All they knew must be kept jealously within the organization to teach the people so that they would begin to think for themselves, would be to destroy the surest prop of their power. No one except themselves must have knowledge. For to be ignorant is to be afraid, and in the dark mystery of the unknown a man cannot find his way alone. He must have guides to speak to him with authority. Ignorance was the foundation upon which the priest power rested. In truth, the two, the mystery and those who dealt in it, reinforced each other in such sort that each appears both the cause and the effect of the other. The power of the priest depended upon the darkness of the mystery. His effort must ever be directed toward increasing it and opposing any attempt to throw light upon it. There's even talk in the Bible condemning these ha-kahanim, the axis-controlling priests, because religion's for everybody, right? The humble role played by the reason in the ancient world was assigned by an authority there was no appeal against. It determined the scope of thought and the scope of art as well, with an absolutism never questioned. We know of one man, to be sure, who set himself against it. For a few years, the power of the pharaoh was pitted against the power of the priests, and the pharaoh won out. The familiar story of Akhenaten, Atan, who dared to think for himself, and who built a city to enshrine and propagate the worship of the one and only God, might appear to point to a weakness in the great priestly body, but the proof is, in point of fact, rather than the other way about, the priests were men deeply learned and experienced in human nature. They waited. The man of independent thought had only a very brief reign. Did his contests with the priest wear him out, one wonders? And after his death, nothing of what he had stood for was allowed to remain. The priests took possession of his successor. They erased his very name from the monuments. He had never really touched their power, but whatever their attitude to this autocrat or that autocratic government failed to command the priests' allegiance. They were ever the support of the throne as well as the power above it. Their instinct was sure. The misery of the people was the opportunity of the priest. Not only an ignorant populace, but one subjugated and wretched was their guarantee, with men's thoughts directed more and more toward the unseen world, and with the keys to it firmly in their own grasp, their terrific power was assured. When Egypt ended, the East went on ever farther in the direction Egypt has pointed. The miseries of Asia are a fearful page of history. Her people found strength to endure by denying any meaning and any importance to what they could not escape. The Egyptian world, where dead man walked and slept and feasted, was transmuted into what had always been implicit in its symbolism, the world of the spirit. In India for centuries, the leader of thought to the east, ages long since, the world of the reason and the world of the spirit were divorced, and the universe handed over to the latter. Well, true religious revivals combine them. Under the prophets themselves. Of course, they got put back into conservative context. Or people pretended they were liberals. Reality, that which we have heard, which we have seen with our eyes and our hands have handled of the world of life, was dismissed as a fiction that had no bearing upon the world. All that was seen and heard and handled was vague and unsubstantial and forever passing, the shadow of a dream. Only that was real, which was of the spirit. This is always man's way out when the facts of life are too bitter and too black to be borne. When conditions are such that life offers no earthly hope somewhere, somehow, men must find refuge. Then they fly from the terror without to the citadel within, which famine and pestilence and fire and sword cannot shake. What Goethe calls the inner universe can live by its own laws, create its own security, be sufficient unto itself. When once reality is denied to the turmoil of the world without. So the East found a way to endure the intolerable, and she pursued it undeviatingly through the centuries, following it to its furthest implications. In India, the idea of truth became completely separated from outside fact. All outside was illusion. Truth was an inner disposition. In such a world, there is little scope for the observing reason or the seeing eye. Where all except the spirit is unreal, it is manifest folly to be concerned with an exterior that is less than a shadow. It is easy to understand how in these conditions the one department of the intellect that flourished was mathematics. Nothing is less likely to react practically upon life or to intrude into the domain of theology than the world of the ideal revealed to the mathematical imagination. Pure mathematics soars into a region far removed from human wretchedness, and no priest ever troubled himself about the effects of free inquiry along mathematical lines. Well, some of that was done, actually, where the minds could go where it pleased. Compared with the Egyptians, we are childish mathematicians, observes Plato. India, too, made notable contributions in this field. But sooner or later, if the activity of the mind is restricted anywhere, it will cease to function, even where it is allowed to be free. Today in India, the triumph of the spirit over the mind is complete, and wherever Buddhism, the great product of the Indian spirit, has prevailed, the illusoriness of all that is of this earth and the vanity of all research into its nature is the center of the faith. As in Egypt, the priests saw their opportunity. The power of the Brahmins, the priestly caste, and of the great Buddhist hierarchy is nothing less than stupendous. The circle is complete, a wretched populace with no hope save in the invisible, and a priesthood whose power is bound up with the belief in the unimportance of the visible, so that they must forever strive to keep it an article of faith. The circle is complete in another sense as well. One of the things you actually find if you look more into the sciences, the more we realize that we don't know. Like the difference about matter and dark force. The wayfarer sheltering for the night in an abandoned house does not care to mend the roof the rain drips through, and the people living in such wretchedness that their one comfort is to deny the importance of the facts of earthly life will not try to better them. India has gone the way of the things that are not seen until the things that are seen have become visible. India actually is one of the more secular countries in the world. That is what happens when one course is followed undeviatingly for ages. We are composite creatures made up of soul and body, mind and spirit. When men's attention is fixed upon one to the disregard of the others, human beings result who are only partially developed, their eyes blinded to half of what life offers and the great world holds. But in that antique world of Egypt and the early Asiatic civilizations, the world where the pendulum was swinging ever farther and farther away from all fact, something completely new happened. The Greeks came into being, and the world as we know it began. Well, the people in India could tell us what happened with that too. They would tell us that whenever the social order, the dharma, was decreased to a certain extent, then there is descending. Is that Bhagavad Gita 760? Obviously, I don't have the verse memorized, but something to that effect is in that verse or something close to it.